How's it going, everybody? And thank you so much for tuning in to another author chat with me today. So I am excited to have author Thomas Olde Heuvelt joining me today, author of the new release Echo from Tor NightFire. So Thomas, how are you doing this evening?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. Yes, we have a 7-hour time difference because I'm in the Netherlands. But I love to be virtually in Alabama.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear it because otherwise I don't know if we'd be able to do anything like this. So,
I
so
mean, like
how, go
in
ahead.
2016, I toured the United States for a long time, like 6 weeks or so. And,
Mhm.
the pandemic has been preventing me to do it right now, but it's slowly getting better. We hope to think so.
Yeah. Yeah,
Hopefully later this year or next year, I'll come back to the United States.
that'd
I
be
love
awesome.
touring.
Yeah, I can imagine it. It's fun. You actually having the personal presence of an author and fan base in the same space that's not through a
Yeah.
camera.
It's magical somehow. There's, the way I perceive my writing is that, you know, there's like this magical bond between me as a writer and you as a reader because, when I write a story, it's mine and I can do whatever I want with it. But when I publish it, it's yours, and I need your imagination and your mind to make it come alive. And so I love that bond. So I'm the kind of author who love to go out and meet readers everywhere. I've toured in many countries. It's just a thrill of the job.
I have a question. I haven't asked this to too many authors. When you write a book and you publish it and a reader reads it and gives any sort of feedback, what is like your favorite thing to see? Is it seeing like a review that they write that's positive, or is it, when you have that interaction in person, it's seeing them kind of like light up when they meet you, or is it them having some kind of takeaway that maybe you didn't expect or you wholly expected somebody to have, and you're like, yes, that's why I wrote this book.
Well, initially, I want, when I write a story, I want to touch people's emotions because the stories that you remember the most are the stories that make you laugh, or the stories that made you cry, or the stories that made you, really scared. And my kind of books are the scary kind. So
Right.
it's sometimes a little bit funny, sometimes a little bit sad. But so I love to hear from readers, I really had to sleep with the lights on because I saw that shadow of the witch in my room all night, or I really, that ending made me cry, that's perfect. Or when you make people laugh, that's fantastic. Um, when you tour a lot and you get to go to different countries, the reception is very different anywhere you go. Like in 2018, I toured in Brazil first, and then right after that, I went to China because both for Hex, and both my publishers had done amazing campaigns for that book, and so there were many readers coming out, and what was fun was the difference in like fanish behavior, but the similarity in what people were afraid of. So in Brazil, fans were like shivering when I came into this auditorium, and they were like, they wanted to hug you, wanted to embrace you. There were people literally who had tattoos of the witch with the eyes sewn shut on their arms.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's crazy, but it's awesome. It's crazily awesome. And in China, everyone's really polite and very much hold back, but same enthusiasm. But they were afraid of the same thing. They're all afraid of the same feeling that they wake up in the middle of the night and they see the shadow next to their bed watching them behind their stitched eyes, like
Yeah.
it's the same universal fear of someone entering your safe space. And somehow Hex really, touched upon that wherever you go.
Yeah, I feel like I definitely shared that same sentiment, and it wasn't that was the first time since I believe I watched The Grudge for the first time, because
Yeah.
I remember when I watched that movie and looking up, like, it'd be like 1 o'clock in the morning and you wake up and you look up and there's just a really dark spot in the corner of your room.
Oh
and,
yeah.
and you just see it, it's kind of shifting a little bit, but you're not quite sure, it's just the way the light's kind of reflecting from the moon and everything. But yeah, I think that, Hex was the first time since then, like, I felt a presence in my room.
When I saw The Grudge in cinema long ago, I was dating someone, and that person, they were, when the lights were out in the room, they would make that noise like
Yeah.
I just hit them, you know.
I still do that. I'll do it to my wife all the time, and I'm sure I'll do it to my daughter. I mean, I do it now, and she just thinks it's hilarious. But you know, she has no context for it. So,
It's
but
just
I used to.
scary sound.
Yeah. I mean, I used to a buddy of mine went and saw it, and every time like we'd call one another during the week, like that was how we would start the phone call. It was back before you actually like could see who was calling you on the phone. So, is oh gosh,
Cool.
this is the best.
Yeah.
kind of like when was it a Scary Movie first came out and everybody was doing the what's that kind of thing. It's like it's just kind of like the way you communicated.
Oh yeah, I love that.
So I kind of want to go back to the beginning of how I generally do these, but I want to know about you. So can you tell me or tell the audience a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got into writing first of all?
Yeah, so my name is Thomas Olde Heuvelt. I'm from the Netherlands. My last name is it's like Old Dutch dialect. It means old hill, even though we don't have any hills in the Netherlands. It's a very boring country. But I've grown up with scary stories. I had, the best thing you can give a child is a storyteller. And I had a couple of storytellers in my life. I had my grandfather and my uncle, and they both told me the kind of stories that were not like really suited for children. So when I
The
was
best kind.
yeah, I mean, of course, when I was 7 years old, my uncle told me Roald Dahl's The Witches, and when I was 8 years old, he told me Bram Stoker's Dracula, and he did it in installments whenever we spent the weekend. My sister and I spent a weekend in Amsterdam where he lived. He would in the evening sit next to the bed. Lights were out in the room, so it was this dark shape, and he would tell stories that way. And he did it the same way, Netflix series are nowadays build up with, cliffhangers and okay, next week I'll tell you more. And it scared the hell out of me, after The Witches. Yeah, I don't know if you know that story. It's about a boys trapped in a hotel in England. It's based on a children's novel by Roald Dahl. And these witches are all women with gloves on because they have claws, and so they want to hide their claws. And it was winter in Amsterdam, and women on the streets were wearing gloves, and I trusted nobody anymore. He
Can
traumatized
imagine.
me in all the good ways. And, and at some point, also some dark stuff happened in my youth. Like my father died when I was really young. I was 3 years old when he died, and I, as a child, envisioned death as something that lived in the attic where we lived, and there was this dark place between the laundromat and the washing lines, and I thought it was right there, and it could come down to grab me or my mom or my sister when I would make too much noise on the stairs or something. And the only way for me to deal with these kind of feelings and to give them purpose was to tell my own scary stories. And so I started doing that at a really young age. I think it was like 7 when I started writing my first stories, and I never stopped.
Wow. It's funny. I had a chat with Katrina Ward a couple of weeks
Yeah,
ago, which I know you're about to have a chat with her fairly soon, and I'm sure
yeah,
you've already had chats with her before, and I'm pretty sure I've seen some pictures of y'all together. But we were talking about how, when you're younger, how fear isn't, you can't really interpret why you're afraid of something, but you just inherently are, and where that comes from. So it's interesting that you shared that story, and thank you so much for sharing it, because I was telling her, I was like, when I was younger, and honestly, it still creeps in the back of my mind, even at 31, like it's still there, but the whole like cutting a light off before going upstairs. You always feel like something's going to touch your hand when you hit the light switch, or
Oh yeah.
something's going to chase you up because it's pitch black.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out, where that fear comes from. And to hear you kind of to talk about that, it kind of brought that back up. So, as far as your writing goes, so you've been writing since you were really young. When did you decide to start writing seriously? Like, when were you like, I'm gonna write something and I'm gonna to try to get it published?
I think I was 16 years old when I started writing what would become my first novel in the Netherlands. You know, the thing is, in the Netherlands where I'm from, there's no tradition of horror literature or of fantasy or science fiction. Our literature is very internal monologue, very, well, a little bit boring. We have a very Calvinistic nature. The Dutch, they're very down to earth people, very, a lot of interior monologues, and so we don't have that plot driven storytelling that American literature um, is characterized by. So for my horror, I always needed to read. Well, first, when I was too young, I needed to read translation, so I could only get my hands on Stephen King, Clive Barker, Dean Koontz, and Peter Straub. They were translated into Dutch. And at some point, when I started reading in English, my view broadened a little bit. And by then, it was in my teen years, and by then I already knew, that's what I want to do when I grow up. I want to tell my scary stories and share them all over the world. So my first novel in the Netherlands was published, I think I was 19 years old. But it was not until Hex, like 10 years later or so, that I started reaching a wide audience. And interestingly enough, Hex was published in 2016 in the United States. It was my fifth novel in Holland.
Oh, wow.
But after I toured in the United States for 6 weeks and Stephen King tweeted about the book and all that stuff happened, that's when the Dutch media jumped on the book, and then it became a huge bestseller in my own country. But it was only after I broke through the language barrier, and and the book was sold by then to like 24 countries or so.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, I feel like King really does launch careers.
Oh yeah,
it's so crazy because I've seen it happen like C.J. Tudor, Katrina as another example. I mean, like just a simple tweet by him, and like I feel like you just kind of hit the bestseller list. It's so crazy, like how his fan base just flocks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so grateful for what he's done, and I mean, it's fantastic for young authors who are breaking through to get his support, because literally hundreds of thousands of readers around the world have discovered my books because of him. And that's just amazing when someone is such a pop culture icon around the world, a once in a generation icon, and then to have his support, his embrace for that book, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
it was one of the best moments of my career.
Yeah. I mean, and I mean, you were talking about how you only had so much that was translated into your language. It's not a bad to like read from. You King, Straub, Koontz, and Barker. You can't really go wrong with those. I mean, I understand there's a lot more out there, but that's definitely a great way to start, especially leading into a career as you have. So.
I owe them a lot, definitely. They shaped my teen years, if you will. I don't know if it's a good thing when you say, yeah, Stephen King shaped my teen years, but for me, it turned out all right.
I mean, at least he writes really great young characters. So
definitely.
Go, this is kind of in my wheelhouse a little bit.
Yeah, until they start become obsessed by Nazis, and until they start murdering everyone around them, or
right. So you said you've got you had your 5 other books before Hex. So is there a process to getting those, like, I guess, put into other languages? Are those books going to stay just in Dutch? Are those planning on being re-released at some point in the future, like in English and so forth?
I'm not sure. That I was really young when I was published, and I was growing a lot as an author. And when I look back at these early books, it's a bit as if you're looking back at like pictures from your teen years or so.
Right.
Oh yeah, that's what it looked like back then.
Yeah, you get your Facebook 8-year memory.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, let's stay away from that. No, I mean, there's been a huge run on those books by Dutch audiences now that I've become this household name here, and then people want to see the early books. Some of them are actually out of print. Some are still available. There's one novel that I'm really proud of. It's a novel that came right before Hex, but that's actually not a horror novel. It's more of a magical realism kind of book. But it's kind of funny because the 3 short stories I broke out with in America, they are not horror stories. They are these kind of fantasy, magical realism kind of stories. One of them, The Day the World Turned Upside Down, got me this Yugo rocket, which was really awesome.
Fancy.
Yeah, I did not see that coming, but that was fantastic. But they were not horror stories. And so the novel right before Hex was not a horror novel either, but it's a really good novel, I think. And I think that could be translated one day. But right now I'm again focusing on the creepy stories.
There you
So
go.
I think that's something for, in the future.
I gotcha. Yeah, I mean, stick to your guns, right? You want to make sure you're like, all right, horror's where I'm at. Horror's what's selling. Let's just keep churning them out.
Yeah, and I like it.
Yeah, exactly. So since you've been writing, for a while now, would you say that your writing process has changed, since the beginning to now? Has it stayed the same? Kind of what is your writing process? Do you outline a lot? Do you just kind of write until it's done? What is your process?
So my process is I need to be, there needs to be an idea that has some sort of a wow factor. And usually that's a very visual idea. For Hex, it was plain and simple. It was this woman who had the eyes stitched up and her mouth stitched up, haunting this little town. And what made that idea work is not that people were afraid of her, but that they were annoyed by her.
Right.
When she comes in the bathroom for so many times, they just hang a dish towel over her head and then take a shower or something.
Right.
That clicked, that made it original, and then that made it work. So when I have an idea like that, I plot a little bit, like the first couple of chapters ahead, but then I just plow into it and see where it goes. And whenever I proceed another chapter, I plot the next chapter so that I don't have to, think while I'm writing. So, but not much more than just the chapter ahead or something. For Hex, for a long time, I did not know where it was going. I mean, there's one rule in town, and that is everyone is afraid of her eyes, and they may never be opened because they're afraid she has the evil eye and she'll take revenge on what was done to her in the past. So, of course, that's a direction you're going to, but whoever would be crazy enough to do something like that, or how it would happen, I had no idea. And then when you write, it develops. And Stephen King made an analogy once that he said, like, stories are fossils in the ground that are already there and you just have to dig them up. I do experience that same thing, that sometimes they come together so perfectly that it feels like they were already there.
Wow. Yeah, and that kind of leads me to this. I wanted to, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit for the audience who maybe haven't read Hex, about what it's about, and I want to ask you after that, there you go. There's the re-release cover.
Yeah, I love it. NightFire does such awesome covers.
Gorgeous.
It's really, really.
And it goes really well with Echo's cover too. Like,
yeah, definitely. They look
perfect together. Yeah.
Same artist, Sam Wolf Connelly made them. He's a fantastic artist.
Absolutely. So can you tell a little bit to the audience a little bit about what Hex is about?
Yeah, so Hex is about this town. It's called Black Spring. It's in upstate New York, like 2 hours north of the city. And that town has been haunted for about 300 years by the Black Rock Witch, who's a woman who was convicted of witchcraft back in the days. They believed she had the evil eye, so they stitched her eyes shut and her mouth, and then they hung her, or they hanged her, I'd say. But she never left. So normally, of course, when we're convicted because of people's beliefs, and this was not a real thing, of course, the whole witchcraft accusation period, but in this case it was, because there was something about her. She never left town. So today she's walking the streets of this town. She's entering people's homes. She's always there, but she's muffled. She has her eyes and mouth stitched up. She has her arms chained to her body with iron chains. So there's not much that she can do. So there's this status quo in town where people have to live with her. They're kind of used to the presence of the witch. So, like I said earlier, they, whenever she enters, their homes, they just put like a screen in front of her, or whenever she, shows up next to the open road where people from outside can actually see her, they just build a tool shed around her, or like plant a shrubbery in front of her so that people won't see her. So they deal with the supernatural in a very practical way. But at the same time, of course, underneath their skins, they're still very much scared of the presence of the witch, and they all fear the day that her eyes will ever open. The book is basically about how the supernatural presence disrupts the whole town, and not so much because she's necessarily that evil of a power, but because people cannot really deal with fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. I like to go into a lot of books not knowing what it's about. So I don't really read the synopsis. I mean, generally I'll buy it based on a cover, based on an author, based on praise I've seen about it, which is kind of how I went into Hex. I saw the cover for it, and then I saw a lot of reviews that had come up for it. I was like, I'm really interested in reading that. So I listened to it. And I wasn't ready for like that. I was expecting just down to the ground horror story. This is going to scare my pants off. And what I get is like kind of like a humorous story, like we were saying earlier, was people are just like kind of pissed off that she's around. Like you're trying to eat dinner, and she just like shows up in the kitchen and stuff like that. And so it's like humorous. Yeah, it's humorous, and the people are just like getting so annoyed with her presence because say you've got a young teen couple that are like a make out point or something, and the witch just like shows up at the passenger door and scares the crap out of them. But like at the same time, they're just like, can you just go away? And the fact that you use that in a horror story is just it's so intriguing.
This is probably my Dutch background. Like I said earlier, Dutch people are very down to earth. We're very practical people. Religion doesn't play a big part in our lives anymore. So I generally think that when any sane person sees a witch with stitched up eyes showing up in there, or goats with stitched up eyes show up in their room, they would run and scream. But whenever Dutch people would see the same thing, they would just like hang a sheet over and read the paper. It's that practicality in dealing with the supernatural that I really like. There's also some of that in Echo and in my novel after that, Oracle. It calls for very unexpected and humorous twists in stories, but at the same time, like you said, Hex starts off very funny actually, but then it becomes really dark at some point.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it like starts out humorous. Like, okay, when's this like really going to take a downturn? Like, when am I going to have to like set it aside so I can catch my breath and take it back up again? I just thought that was so funny because I've not seen that before. I mean, I've seen the Carpenter movies and so forth, where there's some humor that's thrown in, but it's really not about the killer. It's just kind of between people. And they're like, oh, that'll never happen to us, kind of thing. Where this is like, it's happening to everybody. And everybody just kind of deals with it. Because nobody's like getting killed or anything. Everybody's just having to deal with the presence. And then some stuff happens, and then they really have to deal with it, So I think it translates interestingly to, I guess, a different audience that's outside of the Netherlands, because the way you talk about how y'all are different from us about being a lot more practical about things.
I think so, yes. It is interesting though, the contrast between the way these people deal with the witch in the book and the way readers deal with her. And maybe it's that practicality that somewhat just fucks with their minds, and they're like, what the fuck's happening here? Because that image of the witch with the stitch up eyes, it haunts so many people. I mean, it's all over the internet. People are so afraid of her. Whereas in the book, she was not really that evil, actually.
I guess it comes back to that like innate sense of terror. Like you're so scared of the unknown, and yet like these people in the book are just like, whatever, we'll just deal with it. I mean, she's been around my entire life. Like, what am I going to do, right? It's like it's almost like having to deal with like Godzilla on a very small scale. Like, oh, Godzilla's here, he's going to destroy some buildings, but we'll have to rebuild. That's what we do now.
I love that one lady in town who, she's the butcher, and so she has this butchery shop, and she makes this special kind of pate every Wednesday for her customers. And she's very much superstitiously afraid of the witch. So what, every Wednesday when she has some leftovers of her pate, she goes into the woods and sacrifices this little plastic plate of pate to the witch. She just puts it at her feet and just sits there and thanks her and then starts talking to her. And of course, the witch doesn't care. I mean, she doesn't even see it, but she doesn't care about the gesture. But then when, stuff goes downhill, the butcher lady, she thinks like, yeah, I need something bigger, something alive that I need to, smuggle into town without the camera seeing me meddling with the witch. That was one of the funniest scenes in the book, I think.
So the second thing I want to talk about, of course, is Echo. So Echo is your newest release. Can you tell the audience about it and show off that gorgeous cover one more time?
Yeah, so this is the NightFire edition in the United States. This is the edition that you get when you're in Britain or Australia. They're both really
great.
gorgeous.
Oh yeah.
Echo starts really creepy. A lot of people are commenting about the opening scene in Echo. It starts when a young woman wakes up in the middle of the night in a mountain cabin in Switzerland. She's an American woman. Wakes up in the middle of the night. She's alone in the cabin. She's waiting for her brother to come there, but there's a snowstorm outside. And she needs to pee. So she's in the attic and she needs to go down to the bathroom. And when she's at the stairwell, she sees people in the stairwell staring up at her. And so she runs back to bed because she thinks she's startled. And when she's back in bed, she thinks, oh, I must have imagined this. And I'm all alone here, so there cannot be anyone else there. So she goes back to the stairwell and these people are still there and they've come just a little bit closer. And so she goes back again and tries to call her brother and still tries to wake herself up because this must be some kind of nightmare. And one more time, she wants to check if these people are actually there. And they definitely are, and they've come a little bit closer again. And that's how Echo starts. There was something that happened to me one night when I woke up and I had that kind of attic room where I was sleeping and I needed to go to the bathroom. And I imagined what if some people are there and they're coming closer each time I start looking. That was something really scary. And, it's very effective scene, I think. A lot of people are I always say, if you make it past the opening scene, you're good. Echo is my possession novel. The way Hex was my modern play on witchcraft. Echo is my twist on the possession novel, like The Exorcist. I love possession novels, but what I don't like about possession novels or movies is that there's always that religious counterpart. Again, this is my Dutch practicality, I guess. There's always the devil or the demon, and there's a priest coming to exorcise the evil power. Whereas possession is really close to obsession. You can be possessed and obsessed by anything. And I'm a mountaineer myself. I like ice climbing, I like rock climbing. And whenever I'm in the mountains, I have the sense that even though I wasn't raised religiously, I have the sense that there's something bigger than me there, right? That these mountains have souls. And a lot of mountaineers have commented on that, like they have that sense that mountains are alive, they have their own specific characters. Monks and priests have come down from the mountains, for centuries and explain it as some kind of divine interpretation. But you don't have to be a monk to experience the life in the rock and ice. You can experience it as a normal person. And you can explain it in the Gothic sense that these are, nature is so grand all around you that you're just awestruck by the sublime experience of something that's so much bigger than you as a person. And that's, of course, the simple solution. But I figure, wouldn't it be cool if there's actually some sort of soul in these mountains, and that in Echo, there's a guy who has a horrible accident high up in the mountains, and he comes down from the mountains, his climbing buddy is missing, presumed dead, and he's possessed by the force of the mountain. He's possessed by this force of nature raging inside of him.
Huh. Okay, so we're 2 for 2 on like super original.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm very much looking forward to getting to it. Like, I was still new before we got in the chat. It's been a whirlwind these past couple of weeks and stuff, but
I
luckily it's
hope you
going to
find
slow
it a
down
scary
today.
book.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure I will. I freaking thought Hex was eventually. it was
Yeah.
it was humorous until it wasn't. So you mentioned Oracle. Is that your next book that's gonna be coming out? Can you say anything on it before
This is the Dutch edition. It's been out for a couple of months now.
Okay.
Oracle is fun. I saw a review the other day that described it as like this is a James Bond novel, but then with horror. It's very much action packed. Oracle is about the sea. Oracle is about a couple of kids who ride their bikes to school in a misty December morning, and in a flower field on the way to school, they see in the mist a ship, and the ship is on its side. It's one of those parts of the Caribbean kind of old-fashioned ships, sailing ships. It's on its side. It shouldn't be there. It wasn't there the day before. So what the hell is it doing on dry land? And so they walk around it a little bit in the mist, and there's a hatch on the deck, and the hatch is open. And a few of these kids go in, and as soon as they do, this bell starts tolling, and they don't come out again. And so the kids who are behind in the field, they call their parents, and some of the parents come over, and they go in the ship to look for them, but they don't come back either. And then the first search team of the police, they go in, but they don't come back either. And by then they know there's something really fucked up going on, and so they have to shut the whole thing down. And the Secret Services are confronted with this major disaster. Like 13 people are missing. Nobody can explain what's happening. There's clearly something supernatural happening, and they need a specialist, someone who knows this kind of shit. But this kind of shit doesn't happen in reality.
Right.
So I figured, hey, I once created a specialist on the supernatural, which was Robert Grimm in Hex. And not to spoil too much about Hex, but Hex doesn't have a very positive ending. And I thought I wasn't sure, but I thought Robert Grimm would have died in the book. It's never really sure when you read the book, but I thought he would. But apparently he was not, because 10 years later, the Secret Service knock on his door. He's on a pension, a very well-paid pension, to buy his silence for what happened in Black Spring. And he's asked to research this new case of the supernatural, of the ship that showed up in this field one morning. And he does, against his will, but he does.
So it's like almost, but not really a sequel.
It is not a sequel. You can read it. You can perfectly read it as a standalone novel. You don't have to have read Hex before it. However, there are a lot of Easter eggs to Hex in the book, and the fans really love that. Robert Grimm is kind of this cult hero in the Netherlands now. People just embrace him. He's 68 years old in Oracle, so he's getting at age. But people love him, and I love him too as a writer. He's fantastic. He's a lot of fun.
So
he's a grumpy man who's all annoyed by authority and annoyed by everything around him.
Yeah, it's one of those things like you don't have to have read Hex, but like I recommend that you read Hex before you read it. So he's almost like your version of like Stephen King's Bill Hodges, huh? It's like always having to deal with the supernatural.
yeah, that kind of makes sense. Yeah.
There you go. That's awesome.
I always said to myself, I will never in my life write a sequel. I don't like sequels. I don't like series. I like standalone novels, and because when the book is done, you want a story to be done. I don't want to wait for a couple of years on a new installment or something. That said, I love this character, and he just showed up and he knocked on my door, and so yeah, I couldn't resist.
That's great. Last question I got for you. And this is just kind of an easy one for some people. Some people it takes a minute. Do you have any books you read recently that you'd recommend?
Oh yeah, I read. Well, I recommend a lot. Road of Bones by Christopher Golden.
Mm.
It's fantastic. It takes place in Siberia. It's a very creepy book, and the way Chris deals with the cold. I mean, if you like Echo, you like Road of Bones because it's both about deserted places and cold temperatures. That's a fantastic book. I also really recommend Catriona Ward's novels. Sundial, the new one, it's fantastic. It's really unnerving, unsettling. She has a way with words that each subsequent paragraph is, you know, more, darker than the previous one, and she makes you feel really uncomfortable as you go along with her. And so I really like those books as well.
Yeah, I really love the cover for Christopher Golden's book. It's very
Fantastic.
striking.
Yeah.
See, I'm just a cover snob though. So like if a cover looks good, I'm at least gonna look into it. If I don't, like, just immediately pick it up and read it.
Yeah.
And yeah, and Katrina, like Last House on Needless Street is still one of my favorite books ever. It was so good. Sundial was great. Last House still like cements it for me. So yeah, I definitely recommend any of Katrina's books for sure. Well, Thomas, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. I've noticed it has gotten darker as we've talked behind you. But I really appreciate it. I love text. I'm really looking forward to reading Echo. Looking forward to Oracle now because especially since it has a returning character that's a sequel that's not a sequel. and I hope that maybe we can do this again sometime. Maybe when your next book is set to hit in the US, that'd be great.
Let's do that, and let's get together if I come to Alabama on my next tour.
Absolutely. Even if it's Atlanta, I will be there. I will drive the 2 hours to come and meet you. That'd be great. So will you enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the books.
Thank you.